Jose, to Elze for hosting me for the month. It's been like a great experience, and this is the work of a 1 month stay in Lisbon. But of course, like it goes back to a bigger research and a bigger body of work that I've been developing for many years now. But before I sort of like start talking about this work and also like mention a couple of my other works, I want to briefly like talk about like my background and my sort of like artistic journey. So I'm originally from Istanbul, from Turkey, and I grew up there pretty much like my whole life. And I think Turkey is like a very unique place. That's why I think I should mention it, because it's located in a very interesting spot in the world. It sort of acts as a bridge and connects Europe to Asia, and therefore it sort of like has both of the cultural elements from Europe and Asia again. And I think because it's such a hybrid structure, and because it has like a very historic, very like deep historical background, I was always very interested in exploring the city and sort of uncover the stories behind this wholesome history and culture. So when I moved out of it, when I moved out of Turkey, I went to USA to start studying arts. And it's been like a very drastic moment in my life, because not just I got out of my comfort zone, but everything about my surrounding changed quite a bit. I sort of went into this new world with a new culture, with new people, with new habits, and with new like ways of living. And to me, that was very like striking, because I always thought that there was this way of living. Now I'm experiencing much more than that. And I think that period of my life sort of like went parallel with my art practice developing, learning more about art, and especially in form of cinema and film. I think my art practice has been shaped quite a lot because of my interaction with cinema, because I think like what I learned most predominantly is how to see things, how to look at things. I think what thinking about film does to you is that you always think about where you position your camera and what you want to point at and what you want to shoot, when you want to shoot it. It's always this like decisions that you sort of define the frame that you eventually get. And I think all of this sort of like changed my perception on how I start looking at things, how I start seeing my surrounding. And thinking about that sort of got me to this point of realizing spaces and realizing how much of a strike contrast between these spaces, how many components make a space or make this living habitat happen. And to me, sort of realizing these like little bits of like these spaces, for instance, in New York, it's the skyscrapers, the people, the greasy metro stations, the air, all of this combine and make a characteristic of this place. And to me, what I was very interested in was my place in this space and how I sort of interact with all these things that I sense around me. And I think these all sort of like helped me to make connections with all of these bits and pieces and start making sense of of it in a more of a visceral sense, in a visceral way. So I started collecting things. I started collecting like photos, started recording sounds, started like writing about these. I also had this like a very dominant sensation of displacement because I was like very away from what I've been used to. So that also like encouraged me to be more active and be like hold on to this position of participating in life and sort of being extra careful and extra curious about each and everything that's happening around me. So what ended up happening is that I started to become this archival person, just recording everything that came across me and just collecting things and making them together and just finding ways to make connections between them. And I think it just went really good with my film practice because film is a lot about editing and about bringing pieces together. Film itself is a chain of photographs, basically. So the more you sort of combine them, more the meaning starts happening between these interactions. So I think film was a perfect tool to start experimenting with making collages for me and trying to find ways to not like just capture reality as it is or capture the reality I'm seeing, but also like trying to use these tools of editing, these tools of like sound, and just create this emotion and feeling that I'm experiencing, and I hope that like other people feel it as well, and just start building up these whole mind maps, really, of certain feelings and experiences and thoughts. But what I was most interested in was memories, because I was feeling very far from my own roots and where I came from. I always had this tendency of going back to the places I felt more comfortable or like more familiar, and that's why sort of I started using my brain as this mechanism of just trying to get like things out of my past and just trying to remember it, even though it was only a certain degrees that I would be able to do that. So like my past work was quite a lot about that, as we talked about it, like my thesis. It's a lot about building this mechanism of memories and remembering, and I was really going for just mimicking how the brain works in that sense, and how it sort of gets out the memory, processes it, and sort of gives it out of this world, how this like connection work in all throughout. I was very interested in, so I made a film about this, and the film was essentially was a collage of archival material found in my grandma's closets and rotten like in like wardrobes. I just like constantly would go to her house and search for materials, and I did found it. Like when you start searching for things, you actually start finding them, and I just like got them and processed them, and then just find a way to connect this like whole generational map, probably like dates like 50, 60 years, and just bringing them together and use different technologies like Super 8 films, analog films, digital films, VHS, like all kinds of different materials, and joining them together and to create this like whole path of a family history, really. But in doing that, I think what I discovered was I was more interested in the sensation of remembering and connecting to a bigger past then I was interested in my like own family past, or just finding out like my family map, family tree or whatever. So then I started thinking like, if everything sort of goes back to something, if like myself, I go back to my parents and they go back to their parents, and this is like the setup where we're grown and developed in. Um, there's this Istanbul aspect, there's this Turkish aspect, there's another like a bigger historical context, and where like how can I unravel this chain then? Because it's always like connected to one thing to another thing. And when you start asking questions, like when I start like, oh, like I'm like this, but like how are my parents are like, and then oh they're like this, but how are their parents are like, and oh they're like this, but then how does this chain go, like where does this go? And these questions about like in a very existential scope um, brought me to a very very far away point, which was then like how the existence ever happened, like how did we ended up being in this world, being in this earth, connecting to like nature and just moving in this like planet, how this happened. So my previous work before Zaratan was actually focused more on like physical existence, really, of discovering that the chemical, the biological, the physical components that enables existence. And I was very curious about that, so I just totally decontextualized this idea and deconstructed matter in a very like a physical sense, and started making collages that I was trying to understand the relationship between things together, relationship between two like matter together, and how sort of like they came to happen, these all of the things that we're surrounded with, like all of the natural things, all of the inorganic things, everything became part of something. And I was very curious about that. And this sort of like then like coming from that perspective, I was very interested in understanding matter, but I was also was very curious about after the existence completed in a very physical sense. I really didn't feel that's enough to justify our position in the world as human beings, because our existence is not solely relies on like something physical. Our bodies, for instance, it's not very enough to prove that, really. So I was very curious about like a spiritual existence as well. That's something we create in our minds, and an existence that we create through a product of our minds. And it got me to thinking that maybe I should start searching more of the stories that people have created, because I think in a very like a loose sense, what is sort of like just transported to another generation is not really like something that you can tangibly hold on to. It's actually stories and words and languages, and the effect of like telling things to people and being present, and also creating stories about this presence and about these interactions. So for this work for Zaratan, I was very interested in exploring that, how I can sort of tune into this like ancestral way of like thinking about existence and thinking about being present, and just focused on like the basic tools that we once had and how did we utilize them. So I think for this work especially, the idea of like deconstructing was very important to me, and I was inspired by this like palette of like primary colors, like that the colors that are used to make any other color in the world. So like the yellow, the red, and the blue all like symbolizes that, like how I saw this piece, I see this piece as this like basic toolkit of like how we sort of like begin um, finding other layers of things itself. So like maybe looking at Apple, but like seeing something bigger than that, or and creating like this whole existential myth about like the first human being in the universe, or looking at fire and finding something um, more than what already is. And to me, like another theme was very important while developing this body of work, and that was light, because I see light as this symbol of guidance, and I think it's very like dominant in mythical stories, and also like in dreams. It's a very powerful symbol and a tool to express a journey to unreveal the truth. And to me, it points like it sort of guided my practice in that sense as well. And overall, throughout the entire work, I was thinking about the ways that I can actually discover these stories that I'm very interested in, and discover this like archaic way of living. And to me, that idea was important for me to discover by a state of meditation. So what I'm like essentially trying to say is that in my art practice, I use this act of repeating and building patterns and continuous movement, like all of these like pattern structures. And also for that one, the embroidery is a great way of doing that, because it's a very repetitive work, and it just puts you out of your mind a bit, and you just enter into this meditative state. And to me, that reflected the that was an important like a bridge for thinking about and pondering on how this like incredible chain of creation and being came into happen. So I think that form, that process was very important for me to sort of reflect on while talking about or trying to point out these subjects, because I'm very careful that like my art practice, the structure of how I'm doing it represents the themes that I want to sort of reflect upon, or just make a statement about. So I think all of these sort of connect in that sense, and entering into this meditative state, I think helped me to develop this body of work, and think about it in another aspect. So I called this piece the length of a good night's sleep. And I was thinking a lot about like dreams in that context, because I think all of them sort of and going back to what I said about like remembering, I think dreams are a great way of remembering things, remembering a past that we're not really part of, and it's not in our like time zone, maybe like in our time scale. But with the help of dream, and with this help of meditation, really, there is a possibility of accessing to more of a global, broader scale of history. And it's a way that sort of it's a way that we connect to our past, and to where all of the things that came before us and made ourselves possible. So I think these all goes hand in hand, by sort of like understanding and finding connections with something bigger than own being and our presence, and just asking questions basically about like belonging and where we came from, and how do we access different layers of meaning in our universe, and how to sort of explore that through color, through patterns, through shapes, and through structure. And for me, like how I position myself is by being this like very like archival and mathematical, and like this like brain of just cutting things to pieces and just showing them and making them accessible for the audience. So I think that's like the artist duty, and that's like how I see myself being part of this work. But yeah, that's all I got to say for this thing. But I would love to like answer some questions if you have some, and just move on like our conversation.
Yeah, I have a wonderful experience seeing these artworks. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
But I'm much more interested in your former video artworks. Can you tell me if you are using some archive material, for example, photos, postcard, or even something from your grandparents?
Yes.
How do you integrate it into your personal experience? For example, you see there's many years ago, even before you were born, and the history at that time was different from right now. You see in Turkey, for example, at that time, after World War II, and Turkey's go to is a kind of a democratic and open society.
Yes.
And your parents' life experience quite different from that. And they have a legacy, for example, some Islamic legacy, but it's different from what you are experiencing right now. For example, they are using different languages in different writing system.
Yes.
You know, young people here cannot understand the formal writing from the ancient ancestors. So what is your main thread or your clue how to integrate different all of these you see not only collage, I think there's a main, for example, skeleton inside of them, how you integrating your personal experience into these artworks.
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's very true that they have experienced something very different from what I'm experiencing right now, especially in the context of Turkey. I would say that because a lot has changed and is changing even right now, and they have like this very different way of living, and obviously it's not something that I can fully comprehend. I can't really position myself in their own context. I don't think that would be possible because it's a very different experience. But I would say that to me, it's more of this sense of investigation and knowing more about their own context than me being like super empathetic towards their lives. I think the more I know, the more I access that information, the perspective that I have for them changes that much, and I'm very curious about this change than what the changes actually is. I'm very like interested in understanding how my perceptions are changing, my perceptions on them are changing, and what does that to me as a person, as an artist. And that's why, like when you said like it's not the collage that brings them together. I think it's a perspective on like seeing this chain of things connecting and finding like more connections when you don't have like as much information. It just feels like this part of life is sort of like closed to you. That door is closed, and I like to open those doors, and that's why like I like to collect them, but to not just like put them together to create this like oh that's like the house they were grew up in, oh they looked like this when they were young. Obviously like my perceptions on them change physically as well, because I for instance, for my grandma especially, like I've never seen her young, you know. She was always this old lady, and it wasn't like I didn't think it was even possible to see her like that, because not just like the cultural um, and like political environment changed, technology also changed. Like they didn't have that technology to capture the face, the body, as frequent and as much as we can do right now. So I think for me it was like a mystery being revealed, and I really liked this idea of um, seeing this whole world, whole truth, or whole context about them, time and space, um, and just like getting that information and carrying it to like the present time and to my own personal experience, really, because I don't think like what matters is like to see them in like it would be like a documentary, you know, like just them moving around their spaces. But I was more interested in this feeling of how what I experienced when I actually saw these things. So my the way I went through, like the main idea behind those like videos that I made, was that I will center this feeling, this like bittersweet sensation of remembering things but not remembering some other things, being like a total stranger for many of them, or being very present in others. I wanted to center this feeling into my work, and the rest um, I will just use the tools and resources I have to make that come true, to make that possible, to like um, carry that feeling outside and to other people, really. So,
Yes,
yeah.
and do you think it's a kind of a layered reality? You form a new kind of alternative narrative, or you can regard it as a outsider, but
Mm-hmm.
you actually as a part of this legacy,
Mm-hmm.
physically and culturally. So do you think which point of view you want to tend to um, take a position? Because when you make a new collage in video or something back in timeline, you
Mm-hmm.
always changing the order and form a new narrative.
Yes.
How do you regard this?
Yeah, that's what I said. Like, it's not a documentary because I think it's very hard to create something very objective when dealing with something very subjective, like memories, or like retelling of the past. I think it's for me. I never aim to capture something that would hold as this representation of truth. This is what happened. Like, this is the story. To me, what I wanted it to be very subjective for a reason, because it's not your story, it's not her story, it's my story that I'm trying to tell. It's my like version of it, and there's no other way that I can possibly tell this, because I can't really process information outside of my own like very subjective brain. So I think that's like the ethical issue, right? Like when we're dealing with documentaries, or when we're dealing with archival material, because it's very hard to do something artistic and not be subjective. And I think what like film also, it's very much about that. Like, every decision you make, even when you decide to cut at that specific point, or I don't know, decide to shift your camera, every decision you make sort of affects the meaning that you're creating, and affects something psychological in the viewer's brain. So I think it sometimes comes very instinctual that you decide to shift the camera. Sometimes it's very like intentional, that you really don't want to show that part of life. But all in all, it's always there's always a decision behind it, and I think that's why deciding on putting something there instead of there tells a lot about what you're trying to say. It tells a lot about you. And overall, like, I don't think it's possible that you can create something very separate from yourself and from your vision and from your perspective. But I wasn't like, in my work, I never aim to be very much present, because I like to keep it like as detached as possible from, even though it's very personal, like my last work, or even if it's like very like it feels like it's been like touched by the artist, or like you know, the artist's presence can be felt. I would keep myself I would like to keep myself as detached as possible, because I think I'm very curious about the relationship, the interaction between the viewer and the artwork, more than the interaction between myself and the viewer. So yeah, that would be my answer for your question.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking.
I can also ask, you mentioned you work with some VHS archival footage for the other experiences with movies or moving image. I was wondering, because some of these pictures look like artifacts on VHS. That's what I've been looking at. Many of these images, and practically all of them made me think of different things. But there is a subset of them that look like artifacts on VHS, and that leads me also to the question, because from the results, it seems to me like I can sense movement in them. And have you ever worked with like this approach you have with video or cassette artifacts, or more abstract, but moving pictures, so to speak?
Yeah, I do actually have some experience working with VHS, and I'm just like creating more of like abstract video art. I think that was your question mainly. But yeah, I think what I really like about like simple patterns and shapes is that like it can really be it can really like be defined as different things for every person. You can it just like creates the sensation of it connects to some place for everyone else, and it's a very different place, very unique place that comes from like a very personal context, I think. So that's why like I think what I was like going for this piece essentially was to play with this like very basic structure, like shapes and patterns, and just see how they sort of like interact with each other, and to see like how sort of reactions that they would create. And it's very good that you mentioned VHS, and because it's like a very like interesting technology. It's like a bridge between like the analog to like the digital, and yeah, I think it just mimics greatly like this very patchy way of like
Because it's
doing
almost
things.
like the tape head is scratching the
Yeah.
images in that one, and it's the green and the blue also reminds me when when you were a kid, you would come close up to the TV.
Yes.
Before the flat screen TVs, you could actually see
that,
the
yeah.
small LEDs.
Exactly.
Not
Digital,
LEDs, but
digital noise.
like digital noise can be also, yeah. But it feels like it's moving. That's why
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
curious to know if you had worked with animation or something. Then there are other stuff like
What's it talking
like one over there reminds me either of a basketball, the surface of a basketball, or some goosebumps. And interestingly, the one that looks kind of like an explosion reminded me, because you were talking about like the origin of life and this kind of unbroken thread between the soul, everything. There were these drawings by an early naturalist called Ernst Haeckel.
Ernst Haeckel, yeah.
Yeah, so you know, and it's kind of reminding me of his, because he drew like minerals and very small, and many of them have this kind of shape like a snowflake, but with things that are alive or between life and
Yeah, that's good that you mentioned that, because I think, yeah, that's why I said like my previous work was very focused on actually like that, like the biological component of matter really, and I had like spent a lot of time just looking at these structures, the rock formations, the water, like all of these like very like core elements, and I just like had some time like just analyze them in very different forms for like probably like for a couple of months, and I think it sort of like helped me to visualize it more, because I just like had that information, and I just wanted to do something that also like sort of reflect my own style and own way of seeing, but goes back to like these like primal formations of matter and like explosions, as you said, movement, as you said, because movement is a lot important, like it's very important. That's why like I wanted to create something that actually can have like this movement in space, not like be stuck and like stoic and like very like attached to a like stagnant surface. So that's why I want to like, especially for here, I want to start experimenting with that, because this is like the first piece I did more that is like not like two-dimensional, but it's quite like sculptural, because I want to explore more like the ideas of of that relates to movement, because it's a very all of this like things that we talked about today, like how like the time and spaces change, everything just like goes back to the things actually being in constant movement and constant flow, and that even if we feel sometimes it's 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 very slow and not like going as fast as we maybe think that it should. Um, the life, the earth, the nature is always in movement, and that's why things happen. Like movement makes life possible. Movement makes us possible. So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think I also have a question, but maybe it bridges a bit with what you were speaking about, because you mentioned that the work starts from this idea of spirituality and archetypical
Mm-hmm.
myths, and suddenly, of course, for me there is this issue that arose about abstraction and its connection somehow with meditative states or the spirituality. And I wanted to ask you if it's something that resonates with you, like this. Also, because thinking about some of your previous work, they weren't so. There is a lot of narrative and figurative elements, and I think you're going towards
Yeah.
an abstraction path. And I
Yeah.
wanted to um, hear your opinion about that. And the other thing that for me it's happening with this work is all this path towards this primary shapes and color and gesture. It ends up to have like a kind of playful approach, and it even bring me to a kind of a childhood dimension.
Yeah.
And I wanted also to know if it's something that was on purpose, if it's something that is happening and still um, is taking shape. Like there is even something pop for now.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like it was quite intentional, not in a way that I would just like try to make the work like that, but I was thinking a lot about like this childlike way of looking at the work, at the world, because it's like the most raw and like unfiltered state of the brain, I think, and it's very open to like opportunities and possibilities of like looking at a bottle of water and being like, wow, like this is amazing, like you can change this to like a toy, you can make this like a waterfall, like everything is possible, but like it's just like a bottle of water, the form doesn't change, but the meaning you put on it completely changes. So I've been like very much inspired by that, like looking at the stone, like again, like from my previous, like looking at the stone and seeing so much more than what it is, and sort of like seeing the whole process of this two molecules coming together, and like them like then moving like in space and colliding and crashing, and then mountains, and like then it just like falls down, and then it starts eroding, and it turns into this like little tiny stone, and essentially what you see is actually a stone. But when you start like thinking about these stories, it becomes more than that, and it's actually is more than that, because it's not just stone. It's a very important building block of like everything in this world, and that's why like I sort of like been trying to position myself in a very like in a children's brain, and just trying to see the world as like that, looking at the mountains and seeing more than that, or looking at the stories and trying to like add on to them in my own like very subjective way. When someone tells you, you have like the we have this gift of like creating things and making up stories and just interpreting things as like like thousands of different ways. So that's why, yeah, what you're saying is very true. Like I've been like very influenced by that way of seeing the world, a very like childlike and just free and imaginative and creative. And also, you asked another question about like the spirituality and meditative state, and that sort of taking my practice into a more of an abstract place. I think yes. I think now that I'm like seeing my previous work through this lens a little bit more, like through this present lens that I have, I even though it was more formal, like with more like body figures and more like people and the characters, and I still see them quite like spiritual, because I never like was, as like I was answering that question, I was never really focused on presenting things that how they were. I was always like trying to understand the relationship between things, and that's why I think that that's what when the spirituality sort of forward. It's not like in the things themselves, but the relationship between things. So in like my previous work as well, I was very curious about that, putting two things together and sort of discovering something else. And this one is like that too, like sort of like taking something and breaking it down into pieces, like breaking it down so much that it's no longer quite visible to the eye, but you get the essence of it. So the more I think I break down, the more abstract I'm going, and I'm probably gonna go. But yeah, that's sort of that's the direction that I'm sort of heading from now on. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm just curious. You are using a different kind of a language here in this installation or abstract. Yeah, I'm just curious if you want to integrate, for example, archive material into these 2D artworks, or it's just only another direction in your future practice.
Archival material, yeah, possibly, but I don't know. I don't think. I'm not really like sure at the moment, like how would I be doing that, but I am still like continuing like creating my own archive as well, and building on that. Yeah, just like creating my own archive to like my own work and also like things that I collect. So I think it's just gonna become like the work is gonna start to become archival as well. So it's just gonna be
As
this
time
like
goes
whole
by,
loop.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's just gonna build up, and I think I will always like go back to it and try to find things, and maybe when the time is right, like just get it out of there and show it to the like or position it in a new direction.
Reinterpretation.
Yeah.
Great. Looking
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Maybe you would like to know what's coming.
What's coming?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I want to like start work a little bit more with these works and maybe just continue building this installation. So I think in the near future I'm gonna be like expanding on these like individual art pieces and maybe like try to I have like this direction of like exploring more of as I mentioned, like the light sources, the natural elements of the world, and start deconstructing them in a way. So that's like my like next project plan. Start like maybe like I was actually gonna do for this exhibition. I didn't have enough time, but I wanted to do something with sun so bad. I wanted to like use it as like the central like figure in my work, but I didn't have enough time to do it for Zaratan. But next journeys, I'm definitely gonna be doing something with sun. That's I can say. That's something I want to reveal to you.
You absorbed all the solar energy.
Yeah.
Please,
Yeah. Thank you so
Thank you
much
very
for
much.
coming.
Thank you very
Thanks a
much.
lot. Thank you. Offline.
Good job.
Thank you so much. Special necklace.
Yes, the charm.
Do you need to take this off?
Yes, if you can help, I would appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Which to
Vamos escrever para fora.